Great, then we will start. Welcome everyone to the 2021 Budget Committee for November 19th. And just a reminder for anybody who's out there watching in the virtual world, all the items from this Budget Committee agenda and other Budget Committee agendas will be going to the council meeting of December 21st, 2020 for the decision of council. So all the recommendations from Budget Committees go to council. We don't have any regrets today from members of the Budget Committee, and we have a number of other members of council with us online here today, so welcome to everybody. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? I see none for the clerk to note that. So today we have a number of budget presentations from our staff covering community development, community services, and corporate services. So that will take up a good chunk of the morning, and through their presentations, they'll be covering off a number of the discussion items that are on the agenda. And so what I propose to do is go through each section, each of the three service areas, and as we get to the end of each of those sections, we'll take a break and ask any questions that we might have and have discussion on those. That will allow us to ask our staff to come back with any other information that we want for a future committee meeting. And that's, I think, the process that we'll be following today. Are there any questions about our process today? No, that's great. Then let's proceed with the department presentations. And I believe that community development will be our first presenters. And I think I see Nancy there to start us off.
Through you, Councillor Adams, I think corporate services is going to be the first presentation.
Then I stand corrected.
I don't have a mouse though here. Okay, well, it's fine. So, good morning. Oh, you could use the arrow keys. I can use the arrow keys. Sorry about that. Good morning. So this morning I'm presenting the corporate services budget. This slide just highlights the programs in corporate services and where they can be found in the budget documents. I did want to note that my presentation includes facilities and construction management and asset management. Both of those programs have been part of corporate services, but will be moving to new commissions as part of the recent reorganization. So in total, including facilities and construction management and asset management, the combined gross operating budget for corporate services is $34.4 million. Because corporate services is primarily administrative programs or back office type programs, there isn't a lot of revenue to offset expenses. The net operating budget or tax levy requirement for corporate service programs is $30.7 million. Most of the programs in our commission fall under accountable government. There is a portion that falls under community engagement. On the capital side, it's sort of flipped the opposite, and because of our facilities and construction management program, a lot of our capital program supports community engagement, and then the balance in accountable government. And while that's where most of the program is focused, there are some key initiatives in the programs that do support the other areas of focus, and I'll speak more to those later. So 2020 has proved to be a very challenging year. And like most program areas, corporate services had to pivot very quickly to meet the organization's needs. From the ability to work from home, moving to paperless processes, completing the audit remotely, the redeployment of staff, and responding to new cleaning protocols, not to mention all of the work that our legal department had to do to support the town and provide advice and expertise with the ever-changing legislation. Corporate services has been very busy ensuring people and processes are in place to keep critical services running to meet the needs of our residents and businesses. So this slide shows some of the accomplishments related to COVID that were achieved in 2020. I won't go through all of them, but did just want to highlight a couple. The first being the implementation of electronic council and committee meetings. That was really a coordinated effort between our clerk's department, information technology solutions, and our legal department to ensure that we complied with the change in legislation, that we had the technology up and running, and then of course to support and facilitate the meetings. We also led the playbook development, which provides a comprehensive set of health and safety guidelines and protocols for our town facilities. And our Human Resources Department implemented enhanced virtual training. This included a COVID-19...
Mayor Burton, I think you need to mute your mic.
Sorry. This included a COVID-19 learning section under our Oakville Learns to support employees and managers in transitioning to working from home. And it also included a webinar series that covered a lot of topics ranging from managing remotely to some mental health topics as well. And then we did negotiate rent deferrals for town tenants. We implemented waiver of penalty in our taxes and many other initiatives during the year. So while most of our attention this year did get switched over to supporting the organization through COVID, there were many other initiatives or accomplishments that we have achieved. The first being the preparation of the budget that was presented to you on Tuesday. This did prove to be a very challenging year, given the ever-changing impacts that COVID was having on our operations and our budget. We also analyzed the financial impact of the proposed changes under Bill 108, and we, along with many municipalities in Ontario, submitted comments to the province on the proposed legislation. And we were all very pleased to see that they did take those comments into consideration, and the legislation, the final version of the legislation, was much more supportive to municipalities. We also ratified our QP 1329 collective agreement. And in support of culture and continuous improvement, we continued with our facility management review with phase 2 of that program. We also implemented automated processes in compliance with Bill 108. So some of the changes in legislation were implemented earlier than others, and they required quite a few changes to our process in the collection of development charges. I'm very pleased that we were able to do that through our Amanda system and not have to create manual processes. We also, in many of our program areas, streamlined processes and services to support continuous improvement. And to support livability, we completed the Oakville Trafalgar Community Centre, which opened earlier this fall, as well as Fire Station 8, and our advocacy and representation of the town in virtual tribunal hearings. This slide gives a sample of some of the key performance indicators that can be found in the budget document. We do provide a 5-year snapshot of our indicators so that you can see trends over time. And as you can see here, our audit, we've had a clean audit each and every year and would expect the same for 2020. Catherine mentioned our stabilization reserves in her presentation. We are currently above the minimum recommendation of the Government Finance Officers Association, and having strong, healthy reserves has certainly served us well during this time. And I am very pleased that our Oakville Learns is still receiving positive feedback that people are benefiting from the courses that they're taking. Looking forward to 2021, it looks to be a very busy year. Not only will we have to continue to support the organization as we address the COVID-related impacts that will likely continue well into 2021, but we also have many initiatives and priorities that need to be addressed. One of those is our Human Resources Department. We'll be doing a review of our HR processes and procedures to identify systemic barriers, support attraction, recruitment, and retention of diverse hires. We'll also be looking to amend our development charges bylaw. With the legislation now proclaimed, there is a report that will be coming to Council in December that outlines the timeline for the transition to the new requirements. One of the first things that we will have to do, though, is amend our bylaw so that we can take advantage of the elimination of the 10% mandatory discount on our soft services. So that will be coming to Council probably in the first quarter of 2021. As well, we will be preparing a budget and long-term forecast. We'll also be investigating insurance claim management systems to support our insurance program and ensure that we enhance our proactive risk management. And we'll continue to defend and advance the town's position and interest in planning, development, and litigation matters. We'll also be implementing a new agenda management software program in the second quarter of 2021. That will replace our existing program, which is at end of life and will no longer be supported. While most of our initiatives do fall under accountable government, we do have some that fall under other areas of focus, and the first being livability. We'll continue the defense of the town's livable Oakville plan. We'll also be looking to renovate the coach house and protect a valuable cultural asset. Our Information Technologies Solutions Department, will be supporting our online strategy that's being developed and implemented. They'll be ensuring that the architecture for online services and mobile services is robust, highly reliable, and of high quality. And our Finance Department will be implementing a new property tax software system, and one of the key elements of that system will be online self-serve capabilities. In support of the environment, our Facilities and Construction Management Department will continue the implementation of Conservation Demand Management Program. We'll also be looking to identify and incorporate climate change mitigation and adaptation opportunities in our asset management plans. Climate change and addressing the issues or impacts of climate change is a key deliverable of asset management plans and will receive considerable focus next year. As well, we'll be exploring opportunities to reduce our energy requirements in our data center. I mentioned earlier that we had continued on with phase 2 of our facility services review. Last year when I presented to Council, I highlighted the 8 steps in the program for phase 2. I am pleased to say that 5 of those steps have been completed this year. We have developed the mission vision strategy for the facility management role. We've also established key service levels based on the building categories. And a set of meaningful and measurable KPIs have been developed. We also looked at our data management and our collection of information to ensure that what we're collecting is used for evidence-based decisions, and we're looking to enhance that data management as we go forward. And we identified some of the functional gaps that we currently have. I am pleased that to date there has been some quick wins out of the study, and one of those is and on the energy management side and consumption. Based on placing more emphasis on our building automation systems, we have incorporated savings of almost $300,000 in the proposed budget for energy reductions. They're not all found in our Facility and Construction Management Department. They are spread through departments with large buildings such as recreation and transit, but it certainly is a big step forward for us. And our future state that we'll be looking for once the study is completed and implemented, it will result in a coordinated and consistent approach in the operations of our buildings to ensure that we're meeting our climate change objectives, that our service and resourcing is efficient, and the sustainability of our facility assets over the long term. So this slide just shows the change in the tax levy requirement between 2020 and 2021, with the green bar being 2021. And the next slide has the numbers that support that. Most of our program areas in corporate services are seeing a minor increase due to inflation, or in some cases a reduction year over year. And that reflects some of the efficiencies through streamlining our processes that we've undergone this year. It also reflects the shift of some of the staff in some areas into other program areas. So one of the outliers is asset management. It shows a 47% increase, but that's really because we've reallocated staff from our finance department. The asset management group will be moving into that new department along with the director. And you can see the reduction in the finance where those people are shifting out. The other area that has a higher increase is in our regulatory services, and that reflects the expected impact of COVID on our civil marriage ceremony and lottery licensing revenue next year. We do not expect things to return to normal quickly. And now just shifting to our capital budget. Corporate services did not have a large capital program. This year it's $8.3 million, or 10% of the overall capital budget. And as you can see from this slide, the bulk of it is in our facilities and construction management program. Our projects, most of our projects fall under 4 of the key areas of focus. The first being livability, and under that we do have the project to continue with the demolition of town-owned properties. Council approved the demolition of the Cross Avenue properties earlier this year, and that will be undertaken next year, as well as continuation of accessibility improvements and of course the maintenance and repair of our heritage buildings. Our Facilities and Construction Management Group has a $4 million State of Good Repair program that supports our engaged community by providing safe and good quality public-facing buildings. We also had $200,000 in the budget to explore online voting opportunities. With Council's decision on Monday night, you may look to amend the capital budget when we get to budget deliberations to remove that project. And under accountable government, our Information Technology Solution Department provides most of the projects in that area, and that includes infrastructure as well as funding for cybersecurity, technology, our identity gateway for single sign-on that will be used through many of our online applications, our Microsoft licensing, and then a small amount of money for the development charge work that has to happen next year. And then under the environment, we'll continue with the energy management improvements to large buildings and our energy management system solution implementation. And that ends my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much for the presentation. We appreciate you going through all of that. Are there questions? If you want to raise your hand, I think I can see everybody on screen now. Councillor Lischina?
Good morning. Thank you, Nancy. I'm looking from 12 to 21 in the big budget book, so that's why I'm just making sure I get there. On page 145, so that's the recommended capital budget, how many projects were carried over from 2020? Do you know?
I don't know offhand. There were quite a few that were carried over.
Okay.
We could get back to you with that information if you'd like.
Yes, I'd be interested in knowing how the dollar amount from the 2020 and what are the new ones specific for 2021.
Okay.
Next, page 149. That's, sorry. Is that? Yes, that's still part of 14. I was interested to see that there's revenue based on some of these programs. So just quickly, how do we receive revenue from financial services or ITS or regulatory or even legal?
So the revenue in finance, it would be primarily in our tax section where we have some fees related to some of the processes in tax. In facilities, construction management, and that, a lot of that is a recovery from capital. So it shows up as a revenue, but it's actually recovering the staff that are charged into the capital program.
I see. So like including legal and ITS as well.
Legal would be a bit different. Legal would be our realty services section. There's some revenue there.
Okay. Sorry, just quickly to want to make sure. 17. Okay, so on page 182, this is the technology initiatives. For the cemetery software replacement, is that because it's also end of life? I know it sounds a little odd for...
It is end of life, though. That is why they're looking at that.
Okay, so that's the reason for the replacement. And then I thought that Planet e-services were already implemented, because I noted throughout the book that there were savings noted because of Planet e-service, the one Planet e-services. So is this saying that it hasn't been implemented yet, and that's the capital cost for it, or?
Oh, through Councillor Adams. The Planet is a continuing program. Jim will speak to it in his presentation. So a lot of work has been done to date, but there is still more work to do, and there's a work plan for next year.
Okay, okay, so that makes sense. And sorry, I think there might be one more. So 19. 20. Okay, so 20. Okay, so page 200. So this is the operating budget forecast for 2022-23. The purchase services. So with respect to the type in human resources, what would be a purchase service in human resources? Is that consulting fees? Is that what that is?
That would be consulting. That would be if we used a recruitment firm for positions, things like that.
And I think I have, that was the end 20, up to 21. So I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any others? Councillor Haslett-Field?
Thank you, Commissioner. Can you remind us, what was the cost of the tax deferral in 2020 that we implemented?
Oh, off the top of my head, I don't have that. I'd have to get back to you. I honestly, I'm drawing a blank.
So if we were to be in a situation where we thought a tax deferral was a strategy that we needed to provide to the community, it would be good to have that information. So is it possible to have it for the next budget meeting?
Actually, I realized as you were speaking. Sorry about that. So we budget $3 million for tax penalty and interest. This year we had collected about $1 million before we started that deferral. So the impact was $2 million. So if we were to defer our taxes, it creates cash flow issues, because unless the province changes the legislation, we would still have to submit to the school boards and then, of course, the region. So we'd have to work with them. So there's the cash flow side of it. If we were to weigh penalty and interest, it would be a $3 million negative impact on the budget.
Thank you for that information.
Is that satisfactory to you then, Councillor? Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation. I note the online voting item that needs to be removed from the budget, and so at the appropriate time in December, when the committee is considering the recommendations, we'll be bringing forward a recommendation to amend the budget to remove the online voting capital item. So if staff can prepare that particular amendment, that would be great. I think we're ready then for the next commissioner presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, and members of Council. I'm happy to present the Community Development Commission budget for 2021 today. On this slide before you, you'll see programs and services provided by the Commission, which include planning services, building services, development services, strategic business services, municipal enforcement, infrastructure planning and improvements, and parking. The tabs are included beside them, and I will note infrastructure planning and improvements will be moving to a new commission as part of the reorganization in 2021. The Commission's overall gross operating budget is $4.43 million. The two of the largest contributing departments are building services at 25.2% or 0.3%, and planning services at 20.5%. My numbers seem to be off a bit, so that's why I'm stumbling. Many of the departments in the Commission have revenue-based opportunities and receive approximately $22.5 million in revenue. As a result, the net operating budget for the Commission is $8.69 million and makes up about 4.5% of the budget, and that's $8.66 million. When reviewing how the budget is apportioned, building services is most impacted by revenue, coming in at about 3.4%, down from the 25% of the gross budget. I'd note that building services has a reserve, which levels off the fluctuations from year over year. The small percentage of costs shown under building services are for Committee of Adjustment activity. Other areas include planning, which accounts for about 23.5% of the net budget, their focus being renewal and growth projects, municipal enforcement at 26.9%, and in 2021 that is largely driven by COVID, and planning services at 23.5%, and that is the focus there is on heritage and policy development. On this slide, you can see a breakdown of the Commission's 2021 proposed work as it relates to the Corporation's key focus areas. So if we look at the operating slide, you can see mobility, $3.1 million and 36%. Livability at $3.3 million and 37%. Community engagement at $2.3 million and 27%. If we look at the capital, you can see livability at 5%, mobility, the largest piece, at 61%, and environment at 30%. I'll discuss some of the specific projects later in my presentation. Looking at 2020 accomplishments, I would note that COVID has played a significant role throughout the year and likely will throughout 2021. That said, the Commission has continued to move forward on many projects and initiatives, and some of which I'll speak to in the following slides. Under livability, the Livable Oakville review has been underway since 2015. In 2020, a large amount of work was undertaken to study and report on strategic growth areas, including the Northwest area and Palermo Village, the Hospital District, and Bronigo MTSA. In addition, the Midtown work continued, including ongoing conversations with partners, including the Ministry of Transportation and Metrolinx. Cultural heritage landscapes have also continued to proceed, with significant landscapes being studied in 2020, including Oakville Harbor, St. Jude Cemetery, Bronte Harbor and Bluffs, Gerlach Gardens, and the Knox 16 Presbyterian Church. As always, staff from Planning, Transportation, and Development Engineering continued to support LPAT hearings, providing expert testimony and supporting the town's position on the Livable Oakville Plan. Under engaged community, staff from Planning, Transportation, and Development Engineering prepared the Scenic Corridor Study, which examined the Lakeshore and Trafalgar corridors to identify and evaluate the elements that contribute to scenic value. This study will help inform and support the Lakeshore West EA and road improvements process. Municipal enforcement staff continued to work with Halton Regional Police on the yearly motorcycle enforcement program, conducting random tests throughout the town to ensure motorcycles comply with the noise requirements. As a result of COVID, enforcement staff also placed a high emphasis on parks enforcement. Thousands of random and proactive patrols were conducted, and enforcement staff worked with Halton Regional Police on the Police on Parks Patrol, or POP, program. Also, as a result of COVID, planning, building, municipal enforcement, and engineering staff worked with economic development to review, renew, and implement a patio permit program that responded to restaurant needs as the eat-in opportunities were reduced. Under environment, Development Services has been involved in several projects, including the Gerlach Gardens Shoreline Rehabilitation Project, works undertaken to repair existing shoreline protection and provide landscaping and pathway improvements. This work has received numerous compliments from area residents. Other work undertaken included Morrison Creek Valley Stream improvement, which included creek realignments and stream bank protection, the Vista Promenade project, which will start this month and address shoreline protection along Vista Promenade and Water's Edge Park, and the Munns Creek EA to develop, evaluate, and recommend preferred alternatives to stabilize the creek banks and to reduce the risk of erosion. The EA process concluded its 45-day public review period in October and will now proceed to design, with construction being phased over 2 years, 2021 and 2022. Under accountable government, responding to the pandemic conditions in early spring of the year, staff from Strategic Business Services and representatives from across the Commission implemented online submission and electronic payment processes for plans, applications, and permits. This was followed quickly by the implementation of a digital plan review software to ensure continuity of service throughout the term of the pandemic. Currently, the digital intake process across the Commission is on the rise, with over 1,900 applications being received since May 4th digitally, and many of them reviewed digitally. Recent updates in building will add to the numbers being reviewed, intake and review digitally, and further enhancements next year will further increase the use of that channel. Municipal enforcement staff also worked with staff from Climate Action to provide online education on the coexistence with wildlife, and they also updated the coyote reporting tool to enhance customer service. Under mobility, the downtown reconstruction streetscape project will also be completed in 2020. The first phase of the project started in 2019, and staff and the contractors are just wrapping up the second and final phase of the project, which is planned to reopen tomorrow, November 20th. Engineering and construction staff also began work with the West River Residents Association on an integrated traffic management plan. This is a collaborative effort between residents, Halton Police, and staff, and it's hoped to be a template for future integrated traffic studies across Halton. In addition, the West Harbor Area Traffic Study was initiated, which is a review of a number of traffic matters brought forward by councillors and residents, including speeding, stop sign requests, on-street parking, and traffic flow. Both of these studies will report back in early 2021. And finally, engineering staff continued to implement the Active Transportation Master Plan. In terms of key performance indicators, this slide provides an overview of some of our service delivery outcomes. The first being municipal enforcement, average time to conclude investigations. This has continued to trend down in 2020. I would note that there has been a COVID impact on this, which may impact the numbers, whether or not you can attribute them to previous numbers, and only in with the fact that enforcement was pretty much solely focused on COVID enforcement for most of this year. We anticipate the trend will continue in a positive fashion, but there was a COVID impact. The second set of numbers reflect work being done in building services. You'll note that this continues to be on trend for the most part. I would note the 15-day permit at 50 days is reflective of only one permit that's come through of that type, and that's small ICI permits, and that's really what skewed that category. I'd also note the NA under 30-day permits is there. That's for disaster-type buildings, and no permits have come through related to that in 2021. The third set of numbers speaks to the applications related to subdivision, official plan, and zoning amendments. In the past, this has been a challenging metric to bring forward, basically because of changing legislation. Over the years, the time frame to meet the statutory requirement has gone up and down, and is currently set for many applications at 90 days, which is exceptionally difficult for staff to meet. It's almost impossible to get from submission to a recommendation report in that time frame. Staff are going to continue to review this metric and determine if it's applicable or needs to be changed in the future. The next metric is development services and their scope site plan. And I note there is a COVID impact in 2020. It's generally a positive trend up until that point. The COVID impact was staff resource related. That has been rectified, and staff believe that in 2021 we should see be back on trend with this metric. Staff will be watching to make sure that occurs. Also with development services, we see scope site plans within prescribed timelines, and that metric is again showing a strong performance. The town's livability through bylaw compliance and successful enforcement. This is really a legal department number. It appears to have dropped off a bit this year, but that is also a COVID impact. In March, when COVID hit, the courts were shut down, which impacted how some cases were dealt with. The second being, we also have currently some cases in the system that should be dealt with before the end of the year that may bring that number up to closer to previous years. The Engineering and Construction Department deals with managing the road resurfacing contract and the percentage of deficient pavement in the network. There's a report on today's agenda to update you on the road network, COVID impacts, and how staff are proposing to move forward with the road resurfacing program. Also out of engineering and construction, meters of bicycle paths and lanes per 100,000 population, and this is an ISO standard, and this number continues to trend positively. Finally, kilometers of active transportation implemented, also out of engineering and construction, continues to trend positively. So looking to 2021, departments have many new and continuing initiatives planned. The next 3 slides provide an overview of the major initiatives, and they're linked to strategic goals, starting with livability. Here you'll see the Livable Oakville review continue with recommendation reports planned for Northwest area and Palermo Village, Hospital District, and the Brownie-Go MTSA. In addition, planning staff will continue to feed into the Regional Municipal Comprehensive Review. Cultural heritage landscapes will continue in 2021, including Oakville Harbor, St. Jude Cemetery, Bronte Harbor, and Bluffs. Staff will continue to support and provide testimony at local planning appeal tribunal hearings in support of the Livable Oakville Plan. And staff will continue to review cannabis legislation and its impacts in Oakville. Under mobility, the urban mobility and transportation strategy is underway, and council will receive a report on the strategy at next week's Planning and Development Council meeting. Also under mobility, transportation staff will continue to implement the Active Transportation Master Plan, including design and construction of projects such as Crosstown Trail expansion, a comprehensive active transportation marketing plan and campaign, and continued support of the active Halton Sustainable School Transportation Hub. Under engaged community, reviews of several bylaws will take place that include public consultation, including noise, business licensing, lot maintenance, and property standards. Enforcement initiatives will also continue, including motorcycle and parks enforcement. Under environment, there are several initiatives, including the purchase of hybrid vehicles for building inspectors, ongoing anti-idling enforcement, the installation of EV charging stations on Lakeshore Road East, further implementation of the town's stormwater master plan and shoreline and riverine improvement projects. In addition, an assessment will be conducted of key lakefront public land with the consideration of Build Back Better. Included in this review are Oakville and Bronte Harbors, Bronte Heritage Waterfront Park, Coronation Park, and several linear parks across the town. Recommendations will be brought forward to council for consideration. And finally, under accountable government, Strategic Business Services will continue to work with the Commission departments to implement the data analytics strategy and use lean methodologies to review processes across the Commission to achieve efficiencies. Other planned initiatives include mobile technology for inspectors, and we'll work and staff will work on the parking strategy, which will provide insight for future planning and development applications. Just a little bit on Planet. The program continued in 2020 and included adjustments to address the pandemic. So a lot of the work at the beginning of the pandemic to quickly bring online services available across the Commission was the result of Planet, just expedited. And as a reminder, the goal of Planet is to create a positive customer experience through key areas such as transparency, predictability, and providing a customer-friendly online interface. Earlier this year, with the digital transfer to digital, again, we did that in early spring, and since then, over 1,900 applications have come in through that digital channel. Key areas of work in 2021 include further work on the online public portal. It's expected that a much fuller version of the portal will be available in the first quarter of 2021, with building coming online first, and followed by other departments in the Commission. And by the end of the year, the entire Commission will have that simple to use online presence available to them, available to customers. Staff will also be implementing additional tools in the background for digital plan review, and again, to create those efficiencies to speed through applications as best possible. Staff will also work to improve the inspection function next year. Again, deploying mobile inspection tools. Also undertaking an end-to-end lean review of the building permit inspection process, and implementing an online inspection booking tool. And this is part of the portal, but it will create a customer-friendly 24/7 access point for customers to book inspections for their permits. Finally, staff will look to improve customer experience by improving the way we communicate. And again, this comes through the public portal, and we've spoken about this before, but one of the biggest examples is allowing customers to actually track how their permits flow through the system through that public portal, so they can log in, look at where their permit is, see what's happened and what's to come. It provides that transparency and the easy way to communicate. Staff will also be developing user-friendly content guides, improving Oakville.ca content to ensure that it's clear and understandable to customers, initiating further integration with Service Oakville, and this is to help provide timely and repeatable customer service standards. In terms of tax levy support for programs in the Commission, you will see infrastructure planning at the top and building services at the bottom of this chart. I would note that parking is generally a full cost recovery area, but due to COVID, there are impacts being accounted for over and above those that can be mitigated or offset by the reserve. Building, again, is a full cost recovery department, except for Committee of Adjustment, which I did mention earlier. Looking at 2021 budget increases by department, I'd note that infrastructure planning shows an increase, and this is mostly due to the addition of staff, a supervisor of neighborhood traffic, and a transportation engineer. Municipal enforcement has an increase, and this is mainly due to COVID. These impacts are for the hiring of 8 temporary officers. Parking, again, has a COVID increase, and this is anticipated reduced fine and pay by space revenue. Building services, COVID impact resulting in Committee of Adjustment. In planning and development services, you'll see surpluses, and these both relate to the allocation program. And as I noted in the past slide, there are several COVID impacts being accounted for, but I would also highlight there are some staffing costs related to allocation. Although there's a surplus to support the work going forward, more additional staffing are required to move that work. More details can be found in the allocation report on today's agenda that outlines the request for additional staff at a cost of approximately $530,000. Finally, I'd note that there are about $500,000 in efficiency savings accounted for in the budget, and this is mainly to do with work through the Planet program. You'll see in this slide the 3 council reports that are in your package today. The first deals with resource allocation, resourcing for allocation. As discussed earlier, this report is recommending the additional staff to offset work that needs to be done. you'll see the staff request for planning, development services, and transportation. The second report is the road resurfacing update. This report will provide you with the current state of the roads, and it takes into consideration the 2021 resurfacing program and how COVID has impacted that. Finally, you'll see a traffic calming report that introduces options to more efficiently deliver traffic calming. And this is by switching some of the processes around to put pieces before others that allow staff to actually confirm activity before moving on and doing work. This will hopefully create a much more expedited process, and staff will have more information earlier on in the process to complete things quickly. The report also recommends increasing traffic calming to $422,000 in 2021, adding $55,000 to the capital budget to start up the automated speed enforcement process, and seeks direction from Council to work with the Ministry of Transportation and the Joint Processing Centre to prepare agreements for 2022. You'll note that staff is suggesting a 2022 implementation, which will align with the province's thoughts on introducing administrative monetary penalties to the process. That's really needed to avoid court congestion and make the program work. And if that all aligns in 2022, we'd be looking at approximately $240,000 to get the program up and running. Moving to the capital budget, the next two slides will provide an overview of the Commission's capital budget. The overall budget for the Commission is $32.7 million, or about 40% of the total town capital budget. Most of this budget is infrastructure planning, delivering roads, stormwater, bridges, active transportation, and that's at $23.6 million. Creek and shoreline work is captured under development services at $5.1 million, and planning and development studies come in at $2.7 million. This slide provides capital project highlights showing how projects link to strategic goals. Under livability, you can see official plan review has and special planning projects at $1.3 million. And Marktown vehicles for building inspectors, an initiative, the vehicles will also be hybrid vehicles at $560,000. Engaged community, Marktown vehicles for municipal enforcement staff who are not currently in town marked vehicles, that's $150,000. Under accountable government, Planet funding to continue the development of a fulsome online solution for plans, permits, and applications, and this is at $900,000, and this was money that was deferred in 2020, moving to 2021. Under environment, stormwater and erosion control at $9.5 million. Electrical charging stations at $200,000. Finally, under mobility, active transportation projects at $6.8 million. The road resurfacing program at $5.1 million. Traffic management and calming at $2.5 million. Repairs to the parking garage and parking lots and equipment at $700,000. And thank you for your time. I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm certain there's going to be some questions. I'm going to get us back to our main screen so we can see hands. So are there hands for questions or comments? I see Councillor Farmer, and then Councillor Lischina.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to clarify, I'm not sure if it would be under this section, but has staff accounted for budget that could be needed from any outcomes for the parking study that they're currently working on?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that hasn't been accounted for in this budget and will likely be accounted for in the actual, really the study is just underway. It would really be a 2021 if there are budget outcomes, but the impacts of the study will likely drive planning and development applications and what's required in those as they go forward as well.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Councillor Lischina.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Jim. First of all, I wanted to say that I was pleased to see about the improving the inspection function. That's really important for residents to actually see, because Councillor Adams and I receive a number of inquiries about when is my inspection happening and that kind of thing. So that's great to see. Just a quick question about municipal enforcement. Have you noticed increased demand on the after business hours? I mean, that's relatively new in the last year or year and a half. Is that where you're seeing the demand come from?
Well, this year is probably a bit of an anomaly, through you, Mr. Chair. I believe the number went from around 5,000 normal calls a year to 14,000 calls this year. So I would say there's an around-the-clock increase in demand. We will have to wait until we resume, move back into more normalcy before we can tell where the demand is actually going to land. But certainly this year, it's been around the clock.
Okay, now I'm going to the book. Page 13, with respect to the 2020 recommended capital budget, the lighting and signage study. Could you just clarify, is that town-wide or is that for specific areas, the $91,000?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe Mark Simeone is on the line, and he can probably give you a better description of that than I can.
Morning, Council.
Good morning.
Through you, Councillor Adams. I'm actually going to defer this to Gabe Charles, as it is an urban design matter. Gabe, if you're there, can you help me out?
Sure. You could repeat the question. I only heard the first part of it.
Good morning, Gabe. The question is, so the lighting and signage study, is that town-wide or is that for a specific area?
Sorry, if it's town-wide. Yeah, it would be for town-wide. Right now, we're looking at phase 3 of that, which would be looking more towards private properties and ensuring that the standards that we have going forward are appropriate.
So would that include, for instance, again, Councillor Adams and I get inquiries about when people are walking on sidewalks that, you know, there's dark spaces and that kind of thing. Does that include included in this study?
No, that wouldn't be part of that at this point. That's certainly something, though, that we could take a look at through our engineering construction group and just see how that could be improved when we're looking at overall road design.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so back to Jim. Okay, so page 270, the percentage of deficient pavement for within the network obviously went pretty big number up. Is that because the 2020 was deferred with respect to the pavement work that we normally do every year? Is that the reason for that jump?
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely, yeah, that is the reason for the jump. And you'll see in the report today that there's a plan in place to try and make sure we stay as close to the council directive as possible, understanding that there was no repaving in 2020, so there is a slight jump this year. Okay.
And my last one is for tab 25, the bridges. It's noted that 11% are due for replacement. Are any of them included in the capital budget for this year? Any bridges?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't believe so, but I will defer to Jill Stephen.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the 2021 program includes funds for design for bridges, and we would be looking at the repair work or replacement work in 2022. A major rehab program that we have for next year is Royal Windsor Drive, which was previously funded.
Okay, so just to understand the timeline, when it says due for replacement, it's from a safety standpoint, do we still have 5 years before it really is critical, or what would be the timeline there, Jill?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we do an inspection of all of our bridges every 2 years, and that gives us the timeline of when we would need to do things. So there are no bridges we need to repair or replace next year. Our program is set based on that biannual inspection to make sure that we're doing the right work at the right time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any others? Councillor, how's that feel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, my question is around traffic calming, and Commissioner, I'm not sure if you want Director Stevens to answer this or not. In regards to the traffic calming changes, one of the core questions is that we have a study ongoing around a 40-kilometer speed limit in neighborhoods and are awaiting that report and analysis in 2021. Is the proposed traffic calming changes in addition to the possibility of neighborhood changes to 40 kilometers, or would additional funds be needed if there was evidence that moving to a 40-kilometer across the town or in neighborhoods is a preferred safety mechanism?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe the two projects are independent of each other. The initiative, the policy initiative before you today is really to provide for expediency in the process. As far as more money, I would again defer to Jill Stephen to make comment on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. If the findings of the neighborhood 40K zone pilot project show that we would recommend a more broad use of that program, we would need additional funds to implement the signage changes and things like that that would go along with that. We did have a previous report a few years ago that I think estimated that at about $70,000 for increased signs. It will depend, though, on what that recommendation is. A neighborhood zone program takes a lot less signs than if we were to just implement 40K zones as we do today with regular signs every, so often as you see them on the streets today. So it really will depend on what the recommendations of that study are. The budget request and the process improvements that are outlined in the staff report are based on the percentage change that we anticipate based on the current speed limits today and the current number of streets that would qualify for traffic calming if we were to reduce the threshold today.
Thank you for that. So for some clarity, if in the report you talk about reducing the warrant by 5 points, if the budget's approved, are you still coming back for a policy approval on reducing the warrant threshold, or is that part of this process?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, we've incorporated it in all in one report so that it would be part of the same process.
Okay, so if council endorses the budget, they are as written, and that specifically they're also then endorsing reducing the warrant by 5 points?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay. My other question, so you might as well stay at the mic, is related to PXOs. So we have a long list of pedestrian crossovers, and as you are well aware, it's a lengthy process. I'm not seeing additional dollars being put towards moving along the PXOs in this budget. Is there a reason for that? And how can you help us explain to the public the balance that is being taken around the amount of time and the number that are being provided for?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this year the funds for PXOs was deferred. However, we did have sufficient funds to advance the design of 10 PXOs. So we have those ready to go for early in 2021. This year's budget for PXOs is incorporated in the signal budget, and we have based that on an additional 10 to be constructed, as we've been doing for a number of years, doing 10 as a discrete package, not including those that are incorporated in larger capital works. So it's our intent to build 10 next year, but we are also looking at ways that we can advance the program so that we can catch back up to where we expected to be in 2021. Through if there are additional funds available, if these come in under budget, we will put that towards additional PXOs, looking at grant opportunities as well.
Part of the reason that the program is the size that it is based on resources. We believe we can incorporate an additional 10 into our program this year, but we also have a number of other important projects that we are working to deliver, and the resources that we have would allow us to add up to 10, we believe, without impacting other projects. I will add as well that the 10 that are in a discrete package would be in addition to any that would be implemented through other capital works. So, for example, the pedestrian signal that's under construction at Crosstown Trail would have been in addition to the 10 that we had proposed for this year. And we have other pedestrian signals that are in the plans for next year that are on top of the 10 PXOs.
Thank you for that. So for my own clarity, from a people resource, you have capacity to handle an additional 10, but would you have the capital dollars to handle additional 10 based on the budget that's been proposed?
Through Mr. Chair, right now we believe that the budget will allow us to do the 10, that we have planned. But as I mentioned, we have already designed 10 from this year. So our plan is to design the next 10 as well. We're not skipping that step, so that will allow us, one, to be ready for 2022 if we, to get those implemented early in the year. And if we have additional funds that are available after we build the first 10, we would be ready to start implementing that second group. We are looking too at options to best deliver them to get the best bang for our buck and the best timing. So we have, over the past couple of years, delivered them in a couple of different ways using a combination of internal forces and contract staff. And so we're examining that together with our colleagues in Roads and Works to see which will be the best way to do that fastest and get them up and running for our residents.
Thank you. So you spend a fair amount of energy around the evidence-based elements of prioritizing the PXOs and prioritizing traffic calming. For the protection of the community. And I 100% appreciate the scientific way you approach it, because there are an overwhelming number of requests, whether it's for traffic calming or PXOs. Is there a process that's going to be put in place this year to ensure that we do not have PXOs on the list that are truly essential for the safety of our pedestrians and our road network?
Through Mr. Chair, the evaluation process that we go through for pedestrian crossovers takes into account where they are and what the land use around them is. So are they near schools? Are they near areas that are high pedestrian generators? Are they near seniors' facilities? Are they connected to trail crossings? Are they connected to transit? Have there been past collisions in those areas? How many pedestrians are there in the areas? And are they on lines where there's not a controlled crossing nearby, but it's evident that it is a desire line, and so we need to provide that safe pedestrian crossing there. So that ranking, that's how they get on the list. That's how they get their initial location on the list or position on the list. But then we also do a field review to ensure that they're located in the right spot, to ensure that that there isn't a condition that's not reflected in the numbers that hasn't already been considered. We want to make sure that we are doing that full review. And we also look at what else is happening in the area. For example, is there a park that is being redone? And we want to ensure that we can get people to that by whatever means they want to get there to enjoy it. And so that may move something up or down on the list. So we do try and do that very fulsome review before we finalize the list.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I do have other questions for the Commissioner.
Oh, then by all means, you should continue.
Further to Councillor Lischina's questions around permits, I was a bit surprised to see the chart and the timing in which permits were being provided. is the process and the investment in Planet this year going to substantially reduce the back and forth that seems to occur between an application and its final permit? Because Councillor Giddings and I do get a high volume of concerns around the length of time between the original submission, resubmissions, and the actual permit in hand to go. And it's with all due respect to the building services leadership, because I know they work incredibly hard, but will we see a substantive change in the amount of time it is taking for people to get those approvals?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are a few answers to that question, actually, and I would say that is the goal, is having an online channel, a solid online channel that provides transparency, allows people to book inspections, to see where their application is, to make resubmissions. All of that is going to help that for sure. There's no doubt about it. I think some of the things we have to just parsing out some of the pieces you talked about, and that's the back and forth. Unfortunately, a subpar application will still be a subpar application. And if they come in and they're not complete, or they have wrong information, that's going to create, we're still going to have the back and forth, and we still need those proper applications. I believe this number that I heard this year was 50% of the applications that are coming in are not complete, don't have all the information, or they based on wrong code requirements. And that stalls the system. So that means people are actually, reviewers are looking at it as an application that then has to be sent back out, when they could be looking at somebody else's application that is complete, that has everything there, and could easily go through the system. So there is a stall there. And this is the conversation we had earlier this year with Build. Exactly that. There's no doubt that they would like the system to work quicker, but there has to be some onus put on their members to provide good quality submissions. So I guess there's a bit of both in that. Yes, the goal and the pieces will be there. We still need to make sure we have buy-in from all parties.
And is the technology being set up to do red flags that before you hit the submit button, this is, we're missing this piece, or you don't have this document? I mean, I don't know how many times I've tried to do an online application in different, in other realms, and it provides that early warning, don't hit the submit because you're missing certain things. Will our system have that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, ours will definitely be an evolution. What's going to come this year will be light years ahead of what we have now, and it will definitely include guides and all of those bells and whistles, although it may not all be contained together at this point. So the goal is to make sure by the end of this year, the entire commission has the use of a public portal that moves us a long way down the road. It's a bit of an agile kind of concept, because then we're going to look at it and integrate any of those pieces that still need to be integrated. But I would say that by the end of this year, people will be much more happy with the process that's there.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Questions, Mr. Chair.
That's it for now. Okay. Councillor Listruna is raising her hand.
I just wanted to, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Hasselfield's question here. And Jim, you said 50%, or what you've heard, potentially incomplete. This is from residents mostly, or is it from the development community? I mean, that just tells me that we have terrible instructions for them, or something, because 50% is a huge number for people not to be able to understand how to properly submit an application.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would say that the large majority of that is from developers or builders. I certainly can't speak to why that is. It's not because of a lack of understanding. It could be because of COVID and rushing. It could be any number of things. And those are the areas where we do need to work with Build, that organization, to try and get their members to provide good quality submissions so that the system can move as efficiently as possible.
Okay, any other members? Got a couple of comments. First of all, Jim, thanks very much for recognizing that some of the KPIs may need to be reconsidered or updated as time goes on. You noted the one that you had on your screen, but on page 58 under the planning services, I note there's a number of KPIs that also look like they could do with a refresh or a review in terms of whether they're still relevant in terms of the kind of material that we're looking for. I'm just pull up the right page here on my screen. I'm not sure if you've got access to it right there or not, but there are a number there that look like they, that for maybe 2 years now, we've had inadequate information to be able to really track them. Is that the case? And if so, can we look at reviewing those as whether those are the right things for us to be working on?
Through you, Mr. Chair, definitely. There are some metrics that we do want to take a look at. Again, the one that relates to applications within the time frame set by the province. If the time frame is 90 days, I think we all know there's very little chance that an application from submission to recommendation report is going to be finalized in that period, especially if there's any consultation required, and we know we do want to consult with the public, but that almost eliminates the ability for that to happen if you're going to meet that time frame.
Yeah, so I'm looking at items 4, 5, and 6 on page 58, which are the percentage of development applications, the percentage of site plan applications, and the percentage of council decisions related to development applications that are appealed within 12 months. So on all of those, it looks like we've got changes that have impacted our ability to track development. So I think we need to look at those KPIs and consider whether we should change them. So then on this question of the traffic calming process, I got a question for you about that process, and if staff could perhaps clarify what's intended. On page 46 of the agenda package, you talk about refocusing them so that we bring forward the public consultation ahead of the data collection component. And I wonder whether that means that we will find ourselves in a position where we're going out, so we get one person on a street saying that they think that there's speeding going on. Does that mean that we then go out and consult with the entire street as to whether there ought to be speed bumps put on the street before we've even gone and figured out whether they're even close to meeting a warrant? And if one person says they're speeding and all the neighbors say, yeah, sure, we should have some traffic calming, we then go out and do a speed survey and discover that when you look at the numbers, they're actually really not speeding. How does that? I'm just worried that we're going to put ourselves in a position where we're setting expectations in the public that we're not going to meet, and so we're going to consult with people and then not do anything.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is actually a conversation that I had with Councillor Hazatila not very long ago. So this is a problem. It's a problem right now, and the goal of moving this around is to limit the resource requirements to do the speed surveys, because right now anything that comes in requires a speed survey, which means we're very limited in the number that we can actually do in a year, because most of them are going to come back unwarranted. So the real problem areas we're not able to deal with in a quick fashion. The goal of moving the process around a bit would be to, if for those one-offs, if somebody contacts the town and suggests that they're speeding, we would check with the neighborhood, although there would be the proviso in that check. It would be a mail out saying, looking for agreement that the neighborhood is interested in speed traffic calming if it is warranted. But I think the big proviso is if it's warranted, and the communications would include the statement that to determine that, we would be moving forward with speed surveys if the number of residents in the neighborhood supported it. And I don't know we've set that number yet, and Jill may be able to correct me, but in a lot of cases it's a requirement of around 75% of the neighborhood has to want whether it's parking on the street or traffic calming before we proceed with actual work.
So we're not changing the threshold by which the neighborhood has to agree to it? I can't remember off the top of my head, but like you said, is it 70% the threshold? 70% of households have to mail in and say, yeah, we want something before we'll go and do a speed survey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we would be setting a threshold through that process.
So that's to come back to council, the details of that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to defer to Jill in case she has another idea.
More information is always good. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The threshold right now is we would look for 50% response and 50% of those who responded in favor before we would proceed. We work with the ward councillors to set the area that we consult with, so that we are capturing any of the neighbor, any of the feeder streets that might depend on that road as well. So in the past, prior to that change, we had only surveyed the folks on the street in question. We've found through other projects that there is a broader group that sometimes needs to be surveyed, and so that's why we work with the ward councillors to determine that area before we send out the letters.
And the letters that go out, would they contain any background information with respect to existing speed survey information that we already have? So, for example, if we get an email in saying we want traffic calming, would we then send out a letter to the neighborhood saying, are you interested in traffic calming? And by the way, in 2018, a speed survey was done and it found this information.
Through you, Chair Adams. We're still working out exactly what the letters will say, but I can say that another report we have coming forward early next year is on a speed survey tool. So this is we had a request for a report from council to bring forward a tool or a report on a tool that would allow residents to see what speed surveys had been requested in the past, what the results had been, and make that more user-friendly and accessible for them. We are working on that tool and hope to have it ready to launch early in the new year. So we would have that available for residents to check before they even asked about traffic calming. They could see whether or not we had something underway, whether we had previously done speed surveys in their neighborhood. And then, of course, we would want to share as much information with them as we could. What is traffic calming? What are we looking at if we were to pursue traffic calming on a street where it's warranted?
I think that transparency will be very, very helpful and useful. Okay, so on this final question on this particular issue, is it more expensive for us to go into a speed survey than to send out mailers to neighborhoods and do that engagement, or is it more expensive for us to do the community engagement than to do a speed survey? Putting out the line, capturing the data, and then looking at the data.
Through you, Councillor Adams, I think that the answer to that question is yes and no to both of it. Right now, the process is really driven it's really demand responsive. One resident can contact us, say there's a speeding issue on my street. We go and we do a speed survey, and we can get all the way through to final design and find out that the neighborhood, the streets, they're not interested any longer, or they were interested, but then they saw what it looks like, what the impacts would be on them, and then all of that work is no longer. We don't go forward with it, or we end up making significant changes that really change the intent of what the traffic calming was meant to do. So the goal of this is to ensure that before we get to that point of investing time and resources in design, or even beyond that into pilot projects or construction, we know that the residents in the area are on board with changes to their street.
Okay, I guess it's going to depend on the letters that we send out and how they're termed, setting the expectations. I think that's going to be really important. So you're saying that the ward councillors in each of these cases would be consulted in terms of what's being sent out to the residents?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's what we've been doing over the past year and a half on any letters. Of course, the program was a little stalled this year due to COVID, but that's how we had been operating with the ones we have under investigation now.
Yeah, the only thing that I think is different here is that we're going to be sending out letters before we've done any investigation in terms of actual data on the street, and that's what concerns me a little bit. And on the question of reducing the threshold by 5 kilometers per hour, which I think is not unreasonable. For those areas that are going through the pilot project right now, we've temporarily set them to a 40 kilometer limit. I presume that we won't enter into any additional traffic calming on those streets until we've finished the pilot. We won't use the 40 kilometer hour temporary limit as the basis until we've done the pilot.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. That we'll go based on what the speed limit will be at the conclusion of the pilot versus what the speed limit is today during the pilot.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate all that information. Before we move on to the next service area, are there any other questions for the Commissioner? I don't see any. Thank you very much for the presentations. We appreciate that, as well as the Q&A. And if we can move to our final commission, that would be great.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of Council. I'm very pleased today to present the Community Services Operating and Capital Budget for 2021. It appears to be frozen. Oh, here we go. So this slide speaks to the departments that are actually in community services and the tabs where you can find more detailed information about each of our budgets. This slide speaks to our gross operating budget, which is $188.7 million, with the 3 main areas being emergency services at 21.7%, Oakville Transit at 18.4%, infrastructure maintenance and recreation and culture both at 19.5%. Our net operating budget is $143.6 million, with the lion's share of it showing in emergency services at 28.2%, Oakville Transit at 19.6%, and infrastructure maintenance at 16.3%. This is the community services budget shot through the lens of Council's strategic priorities. So under operating, you can see that mobility accounts for 36% of our operating budget, livability is 28%, environment is 14%, and community engagement is 22%. Our capital budget is driven almost exclusively by the environment, with 71%, and I'll get into more detail around those projects later in my presentation. Mobility at 16%, livability at 8%, and community engagement at 5%. 2020 was a year of 2 narratives for our Community Services Commission. From January to March, we were on track to enjoy one of our most successful years with respect to participation rates in recreation and culture, and also outstanding ridership in transit. When COVID hit, it completely changed the landscape for almost all of our departments in a variety of ways. We were required on almost no notice to modify our operating models and service delivery models, the way that we used our fleet commission-wide, and we had to deal with ongoing changes in COVID provincial regulations. We went from complete closure to recovery to modified back to fairly severe constraints that we're operating under right now. In spite of all of these constraints, we were still able to achieve a number of great things. We opened Fire Station 8 in July of this year. We were able to complete the fleet utilization and optimization study, which I'll speak to later. And we did assume responsibility for Bronte Outer Marina operations effective in October. And we welcome those boaters to the Oakville Marina operations. 2020 accomplishments. One of the great things that I think that our staff were able to do was to pivot and convert a number of our service delivery models into virtual programming and engagement. Fire Prevention conducted a whole program and campaign virtually that was extremely well received and reached a broader audience. Recreation was able to convert a number of areas into virtual, and now people are able to enjoy their favorite fitness instructor online. Our seniors programs was one of the first areas that we converted virtually. The day that we actually began to close the in-person programs on March 12th, we organized a work group the exact same day, and we began to develop what our virtual offerings would be, because we recognized that our seniors would be the most vulnerable population from a social isolation and feeling very disenfranchised, and we wanted to make sure that they continue to be connected, and our programs such as Dial a Friend and Seniors Without Borders are hugely popular. OPL also did an outstanding job of converting their programs into virtual opportunities as well. They have had the same experience as recreation from the standpoint they're able to reach a much broader audience. As an example, their story times in person used to have on average about 20 participants, and now they're averaging 70 to 80 for each session, which is really exciting. And our amazing special events team converted Canada Day into a virtual celebration. They ensured that our Remembrance Day events were all live streamed so that people could honor our veterans from the safety of their homes. And also they ensured that Santa will be arriving virtually as well to speak to the children of Oakville to reassure them that he will be coming on Christmas Eve. We also opened Oakville Trafalgar Community Center and Park, much to the delight of our residents. It's a beautiful facility, and already our residents are enjoying all aspects of it. We also completed the phase 3 of improvements to South Shell Park in a really important year when so many of our residents renewed their love affair with our outdoor green space and or discovered so many new areas in Oakville that they had previously not known about. We reopened the renovated Glen Abbey Library branch, and we introduced a second creation zone that was greatly enjoyed up until we had to do the closures in March. We also introduced browse and book kiosks at both St. Luke's and QEP, broadening the self-serve options that the OPL provides. And most recently, we introduced the new winter recreation and culture strategy. There's no place like home. This strategy has been designed very carefully to be scaled up and down depending on where we are in terms of the provincial framework for COVID response. So we're really proud of that, and that was a result of an incredible collaboration between recreation and culture, parks and open space, fire services, and the OPL. Under Engaged Community, we introduced the Parks Ambassador Program as a temporary COVID measure. As all of you will know, particularly at our waterfront parks, but also in some of our other larger neighborhood parks, we had significant problems with congregation. So this was a great opportunity to have redeployed staff go out and provide public education in a kind and thoughtful way to our residents to ensure that they were continuing to enjoy our outdoor space in a very safe fashion. And Roads and Works introduced a loose leaf collection tracking application on a pilot basis that is being incredibly well received. Under our KPI outcomes, you will notice that COVID had a really significant impact in key areas. Roads and Works experienced a slight increase in the number of standard deficiencies per lane kilometer from 2019 at 0.16 to 0.22 as of October. The number of respondents satisfied with our winter control operations remains steady, as we did not survey this year, so it's 76% from last year. The number of active library card holders per capita, you'll notice that there was a slight decline from 2019 from 30.2% to 27.5%. The reason for that is the process to apply for a library card requires you to appear in person at a local branch. And as you know, all of our branches were closed for an extended period of time in the spring, thus impacting the number of people being able to access new library cards. Our library collection breakdown remains consistent across all 5 years. The number of public transit trips per capita went down significantly from 14.04 in 2019 and the previous years, which have held very steady, to 5.09. Transit on-time performance actually improved and is at 84.8, the highest in 5 years. The number of response fire crew travel times, and that's less than 240 seconds or less, actually improved slightly in 2020 and went up to 60.78%. The number of fire-related injuries per 100,000 population went down substantially, which is great news, from 3.3 in 2019 to 1.9 as of September 30th. The number of participation hours for recreation programs per capita, as you can see in the past 4 years, has held very consistently between 18 and 20. In 2020, because of the substantial length of time for closures and the severe limitations that we have been operating under with respect to capacity limits, we went down to 6. Recreation program capacity rates stayed consistent, but keep in mind in 2020 that we were operating at approximately 25% of our normal capacity. Facility visits, we had been operating at record levels in 2019, and at the beginning of the year, we looked to actually exceed our best year of 2019, but as you can see, the number dropped drastically, and is now sitting at 1.1 million. The number of kilometers of trails that Parks added was 8. It couldn't have happened in a better year, as we had unprecedented activity on our trails where we had so many people enjoying the outdoors and going out walking and hiking. The number of trees and shrubs planted went from 37,000. As you can see, we've had consistently high numbers for the last 4 years. It dropped drastically to 7,700. And the reason for this was because we did not engage with or partner with any community groups to do tree planting because of congregation limits. And also, we halved the amount of volume that we did in woodlot regeneration this year. For 2021, we're definitely looking forward to the positive impact of the vaccine on our programs, and we're definitely looking forward to it being a positive year of recovery. Under Engaged Community, we will be bringing forward the Harbours Master Plan. We will be, for our North Oakville residents, they will be very pleased to learn that the long-awaited North Park Conceptual Plan will be coming forward to Council, and we will, subject to approval, we will be going out to public consultation, and that will be in Q1 of 2021. And then the goal is to get detailed design done of all of our outdoor amenities at North Park with the objective of ensuring that those projects are shovel-ready and would be eligible in the event that we have provincial federal funding opportunities. We will be expanding Glen Abbey Library into an outdoor programming space. One of the big trends in the library world is to include outdoor space as a part of their library designs. And one thing that happened this year was for the first time, we had a lot of requests from residents who wanted to partake of library services, but preferred to do it in an outdoor environment, and this will allow us to achieve that. We will be repurposing the shooter pads at River Oaks Community Center into multi-purpose space. Prior to making this decision, we conducted detailed analysis of utilization rates across all of our shooter pads across the town and determined that we would be able to easily accommodate all requests to use our shooter pads at the remaining sites. The library will be undertaking their new strategic plan. The timing is perfect in light of how COVID is reshaping programming, and we look forward to very positive outcomes coming out of that, and also there will be a public consultation attached to that development. We're also looking at detailed design for Wallace Park. It is the active sport park in Southeast Oakville, and we're hoping to get that work done, again, with the possibility that this is an area that might be eligible for funding going forward. And for all of those residents who are huge basketball fans in North Oakville, we're also looking at a basketball opportunity for Ward 7. We have 2 or 3 potential sites that we could consider. This would be a full court, but we will be going to public consultation to determine the final location. Under the environment, we are bringing forward the Urban Forest Management Plan. That's a collaboration between parks and open space teams and a number of departments in community development, and we are looking forward to bringing that forward in Q1 of 2021. We are continuing to green the fleet. As Jim previously mentioned, bylaw will be getting hybrid vehicles, and recreation will be investing in the replacement of our existing Zambonis as they reach their end of life with electric ice resurfacers, which is a very exciting development. We will also be adding electric charging infrastructure to support all of these vehicles. We are adding new parks, parkettes, and trails. There will be 3 new parks this year. They are parkettes, and that is Everest, Loyalist, and Hickson, and we will be continuing to expand our trail system. We will be working on the woodlock regeneration program that I mentioned earlier, and also for those residents who have been very concerned about infestations of gypsy moth impacting their local trees, we will be doing a intervention program with to deal with gypsy moth issues. Under accountable government, we will be doing a small T technical update for 2015 Fire Master Plan. This work aligns with the work that Commissioner Sully spoke about with respect to updating the DC bylaw. Fire services is required under provincial legislation to conduct an intensive intensive risk assessment plan, and that is a deeper dive to look at and identify mitigation strategies for areas of high densification in particular, and properties with vulnerable populations, and this has to be updated every 5 years. For obvious reasons, we will be updating the town's emergency plan. As you are aware, our team has been working diligently right across the corporation, managing the response to COVID. As a result, we have been able to incorporate a number of best practices and also lessons learned, and we want to capture all of that information and update, particularly on the pandemic side, so that hopefully we will never go through this again, but should the town or consistently or our successors face a dilemma like this, that they will be able to reference these documents going forward. And finally, the park strategy co-chaired by Urban Planning and Parks and Open Space as well. Under mobility, you will recognize these projects from last year. These were the ISIP projects that were supposed to start in 2020. However, because of the impact of COVID, the approvals for ISIP were delayed. So these projects will actually be fully realized over the next 2 years. So just a quick reminder, we will be launching an upgraded on-demand scheduling software and real-time ride-hailing app, which will allow our riders to both plan and manage all of their trips electronically. We will be launching onboard Wi-Fi across the transit fleet. This is becoming a new standard across the GTHA, and it does two things that we consider to be key. It allows our riders to be able to access their mobile devices while they're riding on our service, and also it allows us to access live stream cameras in the event of an emergency that are mounted on our buses. We are also significantly upgrading our bus stop accessibility infrastructure. Wherever feasible, within 2 years, all of our bus stops will be fully accessible. And for those that will require additional retrofitting, a lot of the foundational work will also be done in that time frame. And we will be upgrading the Intelligent Transportation System, or better known as ITS. Currently, that system is on a radio platform. The radio system will be discontinued next year and no longer supported. So we are making the transition over to cellular, which is actually great from the standpoint of our riders because they will enjoy more reliable and accurate data when planning their trips. For key initiatives, just to go into a little more detail around service reviews, for many of you, you will remember that Recreation and Culture began their service review in 2018. It focused on 3 key areas: direct programming, partnerships, and improving efficiencies in our support services. We moved very quickly in finalizing that particular survey or service, and what we were able to achieve in terms of efficiencies to date, as a reminder, is $865,000 with a $770,000 expense reduction, and that's all been since 2018. However, with the impact of COVID still not fully understood, and we are not sure where recreation trends will go in the future and how people will want to use their discretionary income, we decided to put this in pause temporarily till 2022. And what we will be doing in the meantime is an ongoing environmental scan to get a better sense of emerging trends that we deem will probably be permanent coming out of COVID, where we think that people will place their discretionary funding, and then we will look at that information within the context of the assumptions that were originally developed in 2018 and determine which are relevant and which need to be updated. In the meantime, Recreation is not resting on their laurels. They will be launching a new registration software called Perfect Mind in August of 2021. The reason for this is that the current software, which is known as Class, is no longer supported, and we're really excited about this new launch. What it will do, it will enhance the customer experience. For those of you who are very familiar with Class, it has been a very functional system, but design has not been particularly intuitive, so customers will find it much easier to use this application. And it also affords us the opportunity to expand our online service offerings. For example, people will be able to buy fitness memberships online, book a session with a personal trainer, book a gymnasium online, book last-minute ice online, and among other offerings that we are continuing to explore. We also saw this as an opportunity not to treat this as a straight technology replacement opportunity, but really for a business transformation opportunity. So what we have been doing is we've been working in collaboration with our finance team, and we have done process reviews of every single procedure that supports program registration functions. And what we are doing is we're looking at how we can harvest time savings. The reason why this is so important is a number of other municipalities have gone ahead of us in terms of implementing Perfect Mind. One of the lessons learned that we've heard consistently across the board is that municipalities have had to add additional FTEs to actually support this new software. Our goal, as much as possible, is to harvest those time savings to the point where we've created enough efficiencies that we can repurpose positions over to provide the additional support required rather than having to ask for new FTEs. Roads and Works, also in partnership with Parks and Open Space, also conducted a fleet utilization and optimization study. This is work that is being adopted by many municipalities are doing the same thing. This is a real opportunity for us to look at different ways that we are utilizing our small and large equipment, particularly equipment that's very specialized, that was designed for a different urban form, and look at whether or not we actually need it anymore. As a result of the preliminary assessment, we already have a quick win of $140,000. We're very pleased about that, and the plan is that with the new asset management team, we will be able to work collaboratively with them on an ongoing basis to achieve further savings as equipment changes and evolves, whether it becomes green or, which is even more exciting, that much of our equipment becomes autonomous. And there is a plan in place to be able to reduce our GGH emissions through the replacement of many of our small equipment pieces. The $60,000 that you see here is COVID-related. It's temporary. It's a temporary reduction of travel. However, we're anticipating that while we may not achieve $60,000 in reduction of travel going forward, we think that we will achieve some of the savings, because what we're seeing, particularly in areas like groups that meet on a regional basis, that they are now looking to adopt virtual meetings as a preferred method of contact and collaboration rather than actually having to travel to other locations. This slide here shows the community service impact on the tax levy by program, and the three biggest areas are emergency services, Oakville Transit, and infrastructure maintenance. As you can see in this slide, we speak to the 2021 budget, program budget increase, but I will be going into a little more detail for key areas. So for transit will be increasing their budget by $4 million. As you would have seen in the earlier slides, transit has experienced an incredible drop in revenue of $4.9 million, and that's as a result of reduced ridership during the pandemic. Right across the GTHA, all transit services have flatlined and are struggling to move the needle with respect to ridership going forward. However, we're hopeful that with the positive news of a vaccine and the rollout, that by the end of the year, we will be in a much better situation with respect to our ridership. The team offset this impact with a one-time mitigation of $1.4 million with savings in fuel, taxis, and part-time drivers. There was also capital and growth impacts of $300,000 for the full reinstatement of Route 1 on Trafalgar Road and software upgrades. Recreation services increased their budget by $3.3 million. Again, they also felt an incredible impact as a result of extended closures and then very restricted programming opportunities. So they they've reduced their budget by revenue side by $7.3 million. We have annualized costs for the new Oakville Trafalgar Community Center of $400,000. One thing to note, that would have actually been, under different circumstances, well over $1 million. But because of the service review and the initiative on the part of staff to find a way to repurpose 5 positions over to OTCC, the annualized costs are only $400,000. So that's a huge success for the service review process. This was offset by $4 million in temporary mitigation reductions, and that included things like reduced part-time hours because of a much more modified program menu, staff gapping and salaries, performer fees because of the OCPA being on an extended closure, and partial year closures of Canoke and Maple Grove arenas and White Oaks pools. One thing that I did want to flag, depending on what happens and how long we are in the red zone, we may also experience further reductions in ice time rental. And if that is the case, then we would be looking at potentially closing Joshua Creek as well. And these are intended to reopen starting in September of 2021. Other budget efficiencies of $500,000 were in utility savings, the closure of the bricks and mortar Notting Hill Youth Center, reduced mileage, and contracted services. Under emergency services, their increase was $1.6 million, and that was primarily due to Fire Station 8 annualized costs to represent a full year. That was offset by temporary gapping of the new fire master plan positions, which means that they were just delayed in the year in terms of when we would be hiring them. Parks had an increase of $1.2 million. Again, we had a huge hit in terms of our sports field revenue. We're anticipating that depending on where we are in the pandemic, that we will continue to experience significant capacity restrictions even with outdoor fields. So we identified that we would probably reduce the revenues by at least $900,000. However, we will be monitoring all of our revenues across the commission very closely, and we'll be reporting out in detail as part of the quarterly reports on what the impacts are as the situation evolves. This was offset by a one-time mitigation of $200,000 in the horticulture area, and that was temporary reductions to part-time hours and general maintenance activities. There were capital and growth impacts of $300,000 for new parks, village trails, village squares, trails, and street trees in North Oakville. You will see 3 council reports and referrals. The first one is from Transit. It is the free child concession report. You will remember that at the beginning of the year, we brought forward a report, and the intent behind the report was to harmonize the definition of the child concession to be in line with all of the other transit services across the GTHA as part of one of the early quick win Metrolinx fare integration initiatives. As part of that discussion, Council asked about what other municipalities were doing with respect to child concession, and we were asked to report back on what the impact would be if we were to provide children under 12 with free fare, as a number of areas do, like Go Transit. The second report was a sort of a dual request. One was to provide the history of what we have provided in the way of cricket field amenities to date, and what are the future plans for providing additional cricket fields in Oakville. And as I noted earlier, cricket fields are included in the North Park concept plan. So obviously, when we are looking at making those projects shovel-ready, the cricket field would be part of that. And then, by popular demand, on an annual basis, we will be reporting out on loose leaf collection service expansion options. The Roads and Works team has a report on that. In the report, it outlines cost by area, tonnage by area and age of the neighborhoods, which are sort of the key criteria in terms of potential expansion. Under the capital budget review for community services, as you can see, our budget is $38.2 million, or 47% of the overall capital program. There are two critical areas within this budget. One is parks and open space at 17%, and the other one is Oakville Transit at 21%. Keep in mind that the Oakville Transit program is partially funded by ISIP, and as a result, we accelerated the capital program in that area. And under the capital project highlights, this again speaks to how our capital programs are moving strategic directions as outlined in the Council Strategic Plan forward. So under livability, we are looking to replace fire vehicles and safety equipment for an investment of $2.4 million. Under engaged community, we are looking at a facility and equipment renewals at various recreation centers, arenas, and libraries for an investment of $1.3 million, and all of the recommendations with respect to these projects have been done within the context of our formal asset management, inventory, and assessment process. We also are looking to develop the programming space at Glen Abbey Library for an investment of $400,000, repurposing shooter pads for multi-purpose space for an investment of $300,000. And then under accountable government, we're doing a small T update for a small T technical update for the fire master plan with a bigger plant review being done at a later date for $100,000. In the environment, as you can see, there's a lot going on in the environment which is very exciting. We're initiating the purchase of the electric buses for expansion and replacement, as well as the addition of charging infrastructure for an investment of $13.4 million. We're developing new neighborhood parks, parkettes, and trails through an investment of $4.6 million. EAB is really tied almost specifically to woodlot regeneration. We're also doing woodlot preventative maintenance. We will be moving very decisively on our tree planting programs. And also we're doing invasive species audits and control, and that's specific to gypsy moth. We are doing parks, playground pathways, rehab, and renewal for an investment of $3 million. Replacement of ice surfacers for an investment of $180,000. And under mobility, we are looking, as I had mentioned before, at making as many of our bus stops accessible as possible within a 2-year span, and then also looking at how we can work with the remaining ones to set the stage for them to also be fully accessible as well. And then finally, under roads, we're looking at traffic signals, maintenance work, and replacement for an investment of $900,000. And thank you very much for this opportunity to speak on behalf of Community Services Commission. Questions?
Thank you very much. I'm sure there will be questions. I see Councillor Sandu is number one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Direct Commissioner. Remember your title for a second there, Colleen. I just have two kind of general questions. One is actually not related to my ward, but I wanted to know overall. Do we know what the resurfacing at River Oaks shooter pads will be changed to? Like, do we know what they'll be used for in the future?
The intent is to make the space as versatile as possible. And I think given where we are with COVID, that's probably a very prudent approach, because we don't know what the recreation trends will be going forward. So they will definitely be multi-purpose.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And then do we have any indication at all about how many charging stations we would potentially have? You were saying there was going to be a changeover to electric vehicles for
I
number
would,
of different people.
I would have to get back to you on that. When I was referring to charging infrastructure, I was referring specifically to our buses, but I can certainly get you that information.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That would be helpful. I guess my question is kind of more long-term. I'm wondering if there's going to be any type of potential for us to rent out spaces that we might have from an electrical vehicle charging capacity at Town Hall when Town Hall's not in session or when it's empty in the evening time. It's just something to take away. It doesn't have to be answered today.
Okay.
And then you'd mentioned something about ride hailing for transit. Can you help us understand how that works a little bit better? Would it be kind of like Uber?
Yes, that's actually the company that is providing our software is actually owned by Uber, and so it's a very similar type of experience, and it means that the rider will be able to manage their own trip planning, and they'll get very precise ETA when they're going to be arriving at their destination. Is their bus en route? Where is their connections? So it fully integrates conventional, specialized, and on-demand transit in a very comprehensive way.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. I appreciate it.
Councillor Jenna, and then I've got Councillor Grant and Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Colleen. Just under section 6, under the KPIs, with respect to the number of firefighters per 100,000, that NFPA median staffing rate, is that for suppression only, or does that also include prevention as well?
I believe that's for suppression only, but if the fire chief is on, I will ask him to speak to that.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So through Chair and to Councillor, yes, that is specifically to suppression staffing. That is not including fire prevention on that component.
Thank you. My next question, back to Colleen, under tab 9. Tab 8. I'm surprised that we already have equipment and capital replacements for Oakville Trafalgar Community Center. Is that, I'm surprised that it's already there considering how new it is.
When we actually open any new facility, we automatically put an asset management plan in place for all equipment so that we are planning in a thoughtful way. One thing I did want to comment on, when we do asset management and we're working closely with the asset management team, each piece of equipment gets a rating, but then in the year that you think you're going to replace, that rating gets reviewed again to determine the condition of the equipment and whether or not we truly need to replace it or not. So it's a two-step process that we find to be really, we find it to be incredibly helpful.
No, that makes sense. A question about the libraries. I guess that's the next one. I know the decision was made to remove the fines, and that was, I think, several months ago. Do we have any data about, have the lateness increased, or do we have to use additional staff time to remind people to bring back the items? Is there any data on that?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we've actually found it to be a positive impact, and particularly through COVID, people were really grateful. The single biggest issue that we had this year, and the reason why I'm flagging it is it makes our data a little bit skewed, is that what we had to, because of COVID, we were not able to accept any type of material for several weeks. And then when it came in dribs and drabs. So this is not the right, 2020 isn't really the right year to determine impact. 2021 would be because of that particular issue.
The reason I'm also asking is if you have a popular item, then there's other residents who then would start thinking like, when do I get to use that item? And because of no incentive to bring it back, or less of an incentive, that's my point. So I think it is important to keep that in mind. So that one. And then under 22, okay, so with respect to the parks and open space budget, does it include actually a full complement of our seasonal, so university students for next year? I know due to COVID this year, we had to really cut back on that, but does it include that?
Yes, it does.
So that way our residents also are aware that those opportunities will be back. So it does include it.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Grant?
Thank you. Going to transit, just from edification, I've gone through rates and fees up and down. I've looked as I could through what we had given to us from the budget books on Tuesday afternoon or evening. But are we planning to recover costs through an increase of fares for 2021?
Yes, we are, but it would be at the rate of inflation.
Okay. I'm concerned about that because we've lost transit users, and trying to get people back on board, as it were, and increasing the fares doesn't seem to make sense to me, especially when transit is used mostly by people who are on the poverty line of some sort, or, you know, like myself, just like the convenience of it. So I'm wondering if that's something we can revisit somehow.
We would await the direction of the committee.
Okay.
So, Councillor Grant, Council gave direction to increase fees by the rate of inflation. Hence, Council's provided its direction already, and so if we were to revisit it, it would require reconsideration.
Right, and I understand that. I guess I'm just concerned that given current circumstances and the new information we have, it might be a time to reconsider. But I would certainly like to see if we can get some kind of breakdown as to how that would impact us.
We'd be happy to get that to you, Councillor.
I also have some comments on leaf collection, but I will wait till we get to item 8 just to help us move through the budget today.
Councillor Grant, on your question about transit fares increasing by inflation and looking for additional information, I'm trying to help staff here to make sure that they understand what their expectation is in terms of the information that you're seeking. Are you seeking an understanding of what the impact to ridership would be as a result of an inflationary increase, or are you looking for something else?
I think they'd have some idea what impact a ridership would be, especially, well, maybe not given COVID, but I'm wondering if we could just see that if we could keep things balanced at the level it is for a year, what the belief is that would cost us.
So you're looking for an understanding of what the revenue impact would be of freezing transit rates at their current 2020 level
for 1 year.
For 1 year. Okay. So staff can take that. Okay. And then Councillor Grant, we are dealing with the leaf issue as we go through. So if you've got questions about the loose leaf collection program, I suggest you bring that up right away. I do have a question on that particular item myself, and so I'd welcome that question right now.
Well, you are so much better at questions than I am, so I will see what you say and then add to that if I need to.
Very well. Okay, Councillor Duddick.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Not so much questions, but comments. I'm very, very impressed by some of the proposals you're moving forward with the Commission, especially with that one particular one where you said sometimes staff are associated with an increase for that particular program, but you're trying to do it without that being part of the equation. And I'm not trying to diminish what any of the other departments or commissions are doing, but I really want to commend your commission for the amount of work you've done through the COVID. I mean, you do it all the time anyway, but more so even with the COVID constraints. And special events is one that's near and dear to my heart, but I know that a lot of the various programs that you provide really are the well-being for our community residents, and hence they have a huge impact. So the fact you've accommodated as best you can to make sure it's a safe program and still adhere to the COVID restrictions. And just one last comment, if you could clone Chris Mark, that would be great.
We'll start to work on that.
So staff will be reporting back on cloning technology later next year, I guess. Councillor Chisholm?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through the chair. A quick question, and I echo Councillor Duddick's comments too with respect to the whole changing of gears so quickly during COVID with recreation and parks and open space. My congratulations to all the staff that makes this happen. The question in your presentation, I might have missed it. Sometimes my kind of eyes close sometimes. The pools, with respect to Centennial Pool, am I correct to assume that Centennial Pool is closed down? Has that been calculated within the cost savings within the your accomplishments for 2020?
Yes, it has, although Centennial was open for a period of time for a Netflix production. And
after this Netflix production, which is revenue-based, I hope.
Yes.
Will we be officially closing Centennial Pool permanently?
Centennial, technically from an operation standpoint, it has been closed since Oakville Trafalgar Community Center opened. So those staff have already moved over to OTCC. So it's a closed building and has been since October.
Were there any cost savings with the transfer of an old antiquated pool into a new? Well, we would know that right now, would we? Because we just started at Trafalgar. So right. I'll leave that question for a later date.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, any others? Mayor Burton, your mic is live. Do you have a question? Mayor Burton, we can't hear you, but your mic says you're on. Mayor Burton, you're going to have to try again with your system. Maybe we'll come back to Mayor Burton in a moment because we can't hear you right now. He's saying, cut me off. Well, you can mute yourself because we can't hear you anyway. Councillor Chisholm, did you have a follow-up question? You're live.
No, it just sounds like it's Hollywood Squares out here.
Okay, great. So your mic is now off. Okay, any others? I've got a number of questions for our staff. Some of them relate to some of the comments that we've received from members of the public already, but I'll come to those in just a minute. It was brought to my attention that there's some grant funding being incorporated around Oakville Galleries for special proposal grants. Is that true? And if so, how is it being designed? Is it meant to be grant proposals that we are controlling, or is it funding that's going straight to them? How's it being designed so that we can ensure that it's meeting our needs?
So I'm going to refer that question to Commissioner Sully.
Great.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is funding in the budget for a fundraising study for them to determine their capability. Right now, it's funded as part of the budget, but one of the things we might want to consider during deliberations is having that funded from reserves so that we fund it when they bring the terms of reference back on the review.
So if we ask for staff to report on the grant funding process for Oakville Galleries, would that be appropriate?
Yes, through you would.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Then I have three other questions or issues to raise. One was the leaf zone question that Councillor Grant started on. And last year, I raised an issue along with Councillor China around Zone H and Zone B, where there was one particular part of a community that was built in the 1990s, that it's probably just about the 25-year mark right now. But in the way that we've mapped it out, it's incorporated into the, I'll describe it as the new Joshua Creek area of Section H, which is a much younger community in terms of its calendar age. And so when we go through, I think you were saying that next year we'll be considering whether or not there should be some kind of expansion or not to some of these zones, or adding service to some of these zones. And I'd like to make sure that this one particular community that was incorporated in Appendix N of last year's budget materials gets considered to be carved out and incorporated into Section Zone B, because it's not the same as the rest of Zone H, and it would be unfair to categorize them. They're on the wrong side of the pipeline tracks, so to speak, in that community, and so they're an older community versus the newer part of Joshua Creek, and they ought to be considered like that. And so, as I understand what you're saying is, next year when we come through budget, we'll be talking about whether any particular change should happen.
Yes.
And I agree with that. This is not the year to be trying to add a new service, I think. And at that point, I'm going to ask Councillor Grant on this particular topic. Did that cover sort of what you're thinking about, or is there something more specific that you want to go to?
Well, if we're talking about covering older growth areas, I mean, I am specifically thinking about what is currently known as Zone B. That is an older community, a much older community, about 35 years at this point, I believe. And they are concerned that they've not been well served by the current plans. The vacuum pickup service also, minor things about just concerns about proper leaf pickup in some of their areas. But certainly, if we're looking at the age of trees as an indicator as to what we need to do more often, I believe Councillor Knoll and I, and he can jump in certainly in a second, have had a greater number of complaints about leaf pickup this year than we have ever had before. And it does seem to be coming from Area B for myself. I speaking with Jeff, he mentioned it might be a different area for him, but I know that we're looking at an increase that would be about, I think it was $200,000.
Yeah.
I'll point out that we've had a number of savings from a few areas, and maybe we can reallocate the funds just to make sure that next year we don't have that concern, despite the fact that we're dealing with COVID issues. But that was a concern I was going to bring up. Certainly, I'll leave it to Jeff. Probably will have some more comments that he'd like to make, and I'll leave it to him.
Councillor Knoll, do you have anything else to add, or does that kind of cover it? He's thinking, or he's trying to turn on his mic. I'm not sure which one.
Sorry, I didn't have the Zoom highlighted. I was looking at you on a little corner of my screen. It is the zone that Councillor Grant refers to. I'm just trying to pull up the report here. It is quality. It's mostly quality and frequency of service, I think, rather than the lack of it being part of the program that I'm hearing complaints about. The volume of leaves. I know that the report spoke to the fact that in past years the volume has been low, and that therefore the cost has been higher, etc. But the volume is getting higher as that area gets to that 35 midlife crisis period of its age, and it requires greater service. The other one that I wanted to add just into the mix, because it's a challenging area, is I believe it's Zone E, if I'm not mistaken. I'm trying to find the report. It's the portion on the east side or west side of Neagawa. There's a chunk of that area that is tight against and very connected to the 16-mile trail system, and as a result, the volume of leaves, even though it's about an 18-year-old community, is extraordinarily high. And I'm just wondering if there's any way to consider, I don't know, a split zone or something at some point sooner than the current time frame. I think it's 2031 that is currently allocated. So yeah, again, just to summarize, that Zone E area, that the sort of the closest part to the 16-mile creek, as well as enhanced frequency of pickup in the River Oaks zone that Mark mentioned. It seems that they may just go through once as opposed to a couple times, and I know that they go through in South Oakville. So, and just as an interesting statistic, this year, normally parking is always my number one issue. This year, it's leaf pickup by a wide margin.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Knoll. I see Mayor Burton raised his hand. Is this about leaf pickup, or is it a new topic?
Thank you. Yes, I would support a request to staff, if staff think there's enough time to do so for this budget process. I would support a request for a refinement of the leaf zone mapping. The evidence I've heard from the councillors in Ward 5 and in Ward 6 lead me to believe that although we may have a policy about 25 years, I'm not sure that the actual mapping reflects that. And the other wrinkle that I would like to see in a remap is special zones like Councillor Knoll just mentioned, where there's a natural heritage area producing tons of leaves. And if we did that, I believe the residents would be pleased to see us, come up with a more evidence-based set of maps.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for that comment. I think what I'm planning to do is when we get to the completion of our questions and through the material, when we're dealing with item 2, which is the commissioner presentation discussion item, I do have a running list of requests for additional information, and this would be that would be the appropriate point to be adding in a request for additional information around the zone mapping. And I'll bring that forward. Councillor, how's it feel? Is this about leafs or is this a new item? Leafs? Okay, go ahead.
So Mayor Burton beat me to the punch because I wanted to ask if there could be a nuanced review of the mapping, because even in Clearview area, there are elements that are older part of the area versus newer, and it's a large swath, whereas it may need to be a smaller neighborhood moves in, so the remapping would make a lot of sense for the Clearview area as well.
So just to be specific, you're speaking about Zone C?
I'm speaking, yes.
Okay. Is there, for clarity for our staff, is there a specific part of Zone C that they should be looking at or reviewing? So I understand from Councillor Knoll and Grant that it's, for them, it's the Zone E area that falls between Zone B and the creek. And I have noted a section in Zone H that's of concern. I also had an issue around Dalebrook Drive, which backs onto the creek area, which is similar to what was described. But in Zone C, which areas, what's the more specific issue for our staff to consider?
Listen, I trust that they understand the volume of leaves quite well. And there are pockets within Clearview that have a higher tree density and were built first, and that those trees have survived and are so I would just look for them to say if we're going to do some neighborhood mapping, for them to consider the Clearview area in terms of, is there a way to carve out the south quadrant or the northeast, it's the south quadrant, but from a road specific, I don't have a road name on the top of my head right now.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for that. Any other discussion about the loose leaf material? I see Director Enrico there raising his hand to provide some information. Do you want to provide some comment on where we're going with this?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on this, and I appreciate this is a valued service that we provide to the community. I just want to provide some comments with respect to the mapping. And, I agree that the mapping isn't a perfect science. It is based on assumption dates that are in our systems. In the past, we have looked to try to refine the mapping based on more detailed analysis that's being requested through working with our forestry department and looking at leaf data. It does get difficult because it's not only based on canopy coverage, it's also based on density. And it is difficult then to try to sort of refine that mapping. So I just wanted to sort of make that comment. Obviously this is a discretionary service. There's no hard warrants. We've used guidelines in the past based on the data that we know what we are collecting. There hasn't been, I agree, there hasn't been a really service expansion in the past 10 years. And it's at council's discretion where they feel that that service expansion would be best served. And but it is difficult. I will acknowledge to try to carve out certain areas as not looking at assumption data, but looking at canopy coverage, and it all depends on where those leaves fall to, right? So, and we have areas around the town that there are new areas. They back onto woodlots, and it's very hard to quantify, where to carve out that mapping. So, thank you very much for listening to me. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that. I think that what we'll do is ask staff to provide a review of some of the mapping as part of this process, and so it would come back to us for the December 15th meeting for consideration. So I have a couple, Mayor Burton, you had a follow-up on the leaves?
Well, thank you. Because of Mr. Scalera's information that he just shared with us, it may be that we'll have to go to a squeaky street method, and the staff may wish to ask each councillor if they have streets that are feeling the pain of the lack of precision here, and we'll make a list of the streets that may need attention. What was prompting my the way I framed it was I've had information from the Ward 5 and Ward 6 councillors that certain streets are 25 years old, even though the map says they aren't. And I thought that would be a simple thing to fix. I just heard that that's not so simple to fix. So whether we can, we need to fix it. I shouldn't have said how to fix it. I should have said, could we please fix it?
Okay. I agree, and so it's really a matter of the process of how we ought to get there, and I think I see Councillor nodding his head as well. So we'll come back to that when we create our list of issues to come back to us, and we'll figure out how to get there. I have two other things that I wanted to bring up that shockingly don't have anything to do with leaves, and so, so thank you everyone for the discussion on leaves, but I wanted to bring up two other items. One was an issue around discounts on sport fees. I told you all that I would be discussing the budget with the sport organizations on Tuesday evening, which I did. One of the items that came up through that discussion is, and I shared some of the emails with members of the committee, which is that some of our neighboring communities are planning on doing deep discounts to some of their fees in the sport world. And so some of our ice groups in particular were asking about whether we would be mimicking them or doing the same thing. There are some issues associated with that, which is that may not actually solve the problem, and we may end up, in any event, needing to work with specific organizations to help see them through. But wanted to ask our staff if they could just give us a back of the envelope kind of figure in terms of if there were going to be deep discounts that would mimic the 50% discounts being proposed in Milton, and there are 25% discounts being proposed in some other places, I think Burlington and Halton Hills perhaps, what that would mean to us in terms of the impact of our budget.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I apologize for that. So the approach for reduction of discounting sports fees has been all over the map right across the GTHA. It is not consistent. So for example, you have Milton, who has reduced the fees by 50%, but it's only while Milton, the Milton community is in the red zone. So that means that the sports groups would not be able to do games or scrimmage. Other groups have done a standard 25% reduction for the entire year. Others are contemplating increasing to 50% through their budget process, and many municipalities have held the line and not done any discounting at all. So in our instance, if we were to do a discount, we would strongly recommend that we consider the context of the red zone, because the red zone constraints really impact sports groups, whereas when you're in orange or yellow, they can still actually do games and scrimmage, and they can do training, and there's opportunities. So if we were to do that, and assuming that we were in the red zone for, say, a 3-month period, it would cost us $100,000 a month if in discounts, if we were to do 25%. If we did it for the whole year, it would be $1.4 million.
Thank you very much for that back of the envelope information. For the members of the committee and council, the sport organizations were very appreciative of our current effort of having kept the inflationary rates and having stopped our march upward cost recovery on some of our other fees for the time being. So they appreciate what we've done so far. They, through communication with Mayor Burton as well, which you saw, they recognize that we have a history of having supported our nonprofit sport organizations in the past where they've needed it. And so given that we don't know what will happen in terms of our red zone timeframes and how long we'll be there or what other restrictions will be there, some of these things are things that could be dealt with in year if we needed to provide some kind of other support to our other nonprofit organizations. So I'm going to leave it at that and thank our commissioner for the back of the envelope information that she's provided. Mayor Burton, you wanted to provide some additional comment on this?
Thank you. Yes. I think it's useful for the committee and councillors to know that our neighbors who are contemplating or enacting these discounts are also planning on tax increases 3 times CPI. And so you know, there's no free lunch in this game. If you take costs off of the sports groups, you put them on the general taxpayer. So you know, there's a price for this, and it's a steep one, as the commissioners just outlined.
So that information, thank you very much for adding that. And I'm certain we will continue to be working with our sports organizations over the upcoming year. Which brings me to my final issue or question that I want to discuss, which was we did receive communication from JCRA, in effect asking, could we drive our tax increase down to 0 by using additional reserves? And I wanted to bring that up with our staff. In essence, the tax increase that we're proposing covers off our inflationary costs, and if we were to use additional reserve to drive our increase further down to 0 or to some other number, it would create a giant gap in a future year for us that we would ultimately have to double our tax increase in a future year in order to make up for it. Is that correct? And what kind of hole would it create for us if we were to try to make use of additional stabilization reserves? And even if we got our piece to zero, we would still have an increase related to the region, and so we wouldn't get to an overall zero in any case.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the budget as presented, we have mitigated as much as we could through COVID, over $10 million. The final amount we've used reserves in anticipation that when we go out of COVID, the revenues will go up, the reserves won't be required. If we were to go to zero and use reserves to cover that inflationary impact that's on our budget and is always on our budget, that would create a gap into next year that we would then have to fill. So we'd be starting from a negative position.
So in effect, if we were to forego any tax increase this year, we would be doubling our tax increase in the future year, or it would have to be phased in or something, but there would be an additional giant gap of several $1 million that would have to get covered.
It would make it much more difficult next year.
Great, thank you. So I just wanted to help clarify that issue. We do have reserves, but they really ought to be used for one-time impacts, and that's really, in terms of the COVID, that's what we're talking about. Okay, so that's all the issues I want to bring forward. Are there any other comments or questions, issues that people want to bring up? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So we've dealt with our presentations. Staff, do you have any other material or concluding remarks that you want to give to us before we go through the agenda items?
Through you, Mr.
And
Chair.
I'll also ask clerks just to confirm that we don't have anybody on the line that wanted to, from the public, provide any comment or information to the committee.
Through you, Mr. Chair, staff doesn't have any more information to provide at this time.
Great. If clerks could just confirm that we don't have any members of the public online or who've communicated that they want to provide information.
Councillor Adams, no, we do not have any public speaking.
Great, thank you very much. So that brings us to the items that are formally on the agenda. We have a number of items going through from items 1 through 8. The first one is the review of cricket fields. That's a consent item. Could I get a mover of the receipt of that report, please? Councillor Sandu. Any opposed? Then that's carried. Thank you very much. Then that brings us to item number 2, which is the 2021 operating and capital budget commissioner presentations. And the recommendation here is that the presentations from the Corporate Services Commission, Community Development Commission, and Community Services Commission be received. And I have a number of additional items that members of the committee have asked for reports to be provided to the committee at a future date. So in terms of items that have been requested, I'm going to list them here. If staff could report on the number of projects that have been carried over from 2020. And if staff could provide further information on the opportunity associated with leasing or rental of EV stations. If staff could report on the grant funding process related to Oakville galleries. And if staff could report on, this gets us to the leaf issue. If staff could report on the expansion of the leaf services, like the loose leaf collection services to those if staff could review the mapping of the zones for the loose leaf collection services to better tailor the program, I think that would cover the issue. Mayor Burton, do you have a better wording that maybe we...
Well, as a result of the advice that Director Scalera offered us, asking for remapping sounded like it wasn't going to get us what we wanted. And so I might prefer to ask my question Could staff provide us with a plan and estimated costs for dealing with these pinched areas, these stressed areas that councillors have identified to them, and they can make they can canvass all members of council to see if there are any problem streets that they're unaware of. But it's to my belief that staff well know which streets are generating these signs of stress, and we're looking for a plan and a cost estimate. Right.
Thank you. I'm just going to draft something here to try and help staff on this issue. That staff report on loose leaf collection areas to provide a plan to respond to resident concerns. How about that? And staff can poll members of council to determine if there's.
I would respectfully suggest the concerns brought forward by members of council about streets in their ward where collection appears to be causing, appears to be inadequate.
I plan to respond to concerns brought forward by members of council.
Yeah, I'd like to keep the responsibility level up at the council level here. Or it could be a very long time before you see that report.
Okay. I'm going to turn to staff briefly to ask if they're satisfied with that wording and if there's any issue in terms of how they might respond to that request for information.
To you, Mr. Chair, we can certainly work with that.
Okay, thank you very much. That's great. So those were the 1, 2, 3. There's a fifth one, and that staff report on the impact of freezing transit fares in 2021. I think those are the 5 items that I covered. Councillor Sandhu, did you have a 6th item?
I do. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. It's with regard to item number 7 on the agenda. I'm hoping that staff can either clarify now or in a request regarding any additional data we might have as far as traffic limits are concerned during the pandemic and how that affects this particular report. So we're asking about, or we're understanding a little bit more about traffic calming here. I want to know if the reduction in cars on the road has in any way impacted this.
So that's a question about the traffic volumes as opposed to their speed?
Correct.
Okay. So the request, so before we go there, I think I see, might be Jill on the background there coming forward to respond to the question, or Jim. Somebody's coming to the podium here to give us their take on the issue of traffic volume impact in our traffic assessment process.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I was just speaking with Jill Stephen on this. That'd be something we will report back. We haven't factored that into the studies yet, but it will be done.
Does that satisfy you, Councillor? Can we drop that one as an issue for them to report back with respect to the budget process?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, great. Are there any other requests for additional information that we would like to ask for at this time? I don't see any. I just want to make sure the clerks are satisfied with that list. Have you captured that information?
I'm good with that list, thank you.
Great. Then I need a mover for that, receiving that information and asking staff for the additional. Councillor Sandhu's moved that. Are there any opposed? I see none, so that's carried. Thank you very much. Item 3 is the deferment of climate action tax levy report, and that the recommendation is that the report requested by council in its resolution of February 25th, 2020, directing staff to review options for a tax levy to support dedicated funding for climate change initiatives be deferred to 2021. Do I have a mover of that? Councillor Dudek. Any opposed? I see none, so that's carried. Thank you very much. Item number 4 is planning and development resource requirements. That the 4 additional staff resources be approved to support the increase in the development applications resulting from the allocation program and as included in the 2021 operating budget for the planning, development, engineering, and engineering construction works program. could have a mover of that. Councillor Dudek. Any opposed? I see none, so that's carried. Thank you very much. Number 5 is the 2021 Road Resurfacing Program and Pavement Network Performance Update. Recommendation being that the report entitled 2021 Road Resurfacing Program and Pavement Network Performance Update dated November 11, 2020 be received. And 2, that Council approve the 2021 Road Resurfacing Program candidate list as identified in Appendix A, subject to capital budget approval. Could somebody move that for me? Councillor Sandhu, any opposed? I see none, so that's carried. Thank you. Number 6 is the Children 12 Years and Under Ride Free Program. The recommendation being that the report from Local Transit dated November 11, 2020 entitled Children 12 Years and Under Ride Free Program be received. And 2, that the Oakville Transit pilot a Children 12 Years and Under Ride Free Program until the end of 2022. Councillor Grant is moving that. He happily does so. Any opposed? I see none. That's carried. Thank you very much. Number 7 is the traffic calming process. The recommendations being before you, I'm not going to read them. That's a pretty lengthy one, but it's items recommendations 1 through 6. Councillor, how's it feel? Did you have a comment or a question on this?
I'm wondering if number 2 can, if a more fulsome discussion about the change in the process could be held with all of council. I'm not in disagreement that we need an improvement, and 1 through 3, 4, 5, and 6 make absolute sense to me. I'm wondering if 2 could be either a more fulsome presentation at a full council meeting, or that the approval that it be contingent on a fulsome discussion at council about the process.
Thank you for that question or comment, Mayor Burton.
I hope it will set your mind at ease to realize that the matter goes to council for council's approval anyway, and all questions will be entertained at that time, and staff will take the hint from your question to be prepared to answer whatever, or to fund whatever, or to facilitate whatever discussion you want to have there.
So thank you for that, Mayor Burton. I realize that the entire budget will be discussed. It's just, this is, I wouldn't want to belabor the entire budget discussion for a specific traffic calming process. So I was hoping that it would be separated out. However, maybe I've misunderstood.
I may have been misunderstood or expressed myself poorly. This report goes to council, and at that time, that discussion could be had, was what I was trying to say.
I would appreciate that then. Thanks very much.
So both of you raised some good points, and I'm just going to ask our staff. So looking at the process, my understanding is that whether we move the consultation process ahead of the data collection or not, does that actually have a financial impact to the organization? Is this actually a budget question, or is this really a policy process question? I see that the other parts of this do have a budget implication and ought to rightfully be part of the motions that come through the budget committee as recommendations to council. But this one particular question, could it be carved out so that it comes to council as a separate piece?
Mr. Chair, before you turn to that, excuse me, I really need to correct what I said. The next council meeting is the 21st of December. All of these things will be at council then.
That's correct.
If there's a desire to have a separate, fulsome discussion of this prior to the consideration of the budget, then I would need to call a special meeting of council, which I'm always happy to do. So there is a procedural angle there that escaped my mind when I was speaking earlier. So there's a scheduling thing here, but I'm happy to work offline with the councillor to come up with some way to satisfy the desire.
And the alternative, of course, is that the remaining recommendations of the committee go through council as part of the budget. And this one particular piece, the recommendation they sent to council might be that council consider this particular point separately.
Just repeat that, please.
That council consider what the question of that the traffic calming process for local roads and minor collector roads being modified, that be considered as a separate question to council for its consideration.
Sure. Council always has the liberty to separate an item on request by any member of council. So whether we recommend it or not, the power to do it is there and doesn't require a majority to achieve either.
So on the question of the financial piece of it, if staff could opine on that for us right now, that would be helpful. Mr. Berry?
Through you, Mr. Chair, with respect to the financial piece, the changing the process could have financial impact, could have savings depending on the outcomes of each study that's requested. I think Ms. Stephen spoke to a little bit when she spoke to this topic. What I would suggest for this issue, all of the other recommendations, if council is satisfied with the other recommendations in this report, staff is fine with that moving forward. We'd be happy to bring back a specific report in the new year on the change to policy, which would be more fulsome and allow for further discussion.
So I think it might be appropriate for us to recommend parts 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6 of this report. And with respect to part 2, recommend to council that staff report further on this issue at a later date. Councillor, how's it feel?
I just would like to understand at a later date. I'm not looking to push this too far into 2021 because it is very important to residents, and I know it's important to traffic engineering to have clarity on their process. So can we put a date on it?
We could put December 21st on it if you want it, and that might satisfy Mayor Burton as well. Mayor Burton.
Mr. Chair, I will move all of the recommendations. I support all of them, and that goes to council, and council has its full liberty to change it. But you know, I don't see any value of kicking this can down the road like this.
Very well. Other members of the committee, anyone have an opinion on this? No? Okay, so the motion that's before us is item 7 as written. We've got somebody in the council chamber. Jane, do you want to provide us some information or suggestion?
Certainly. I just did want to clarify that the ability to implement the traffic calming process and all of the budget dollars that are associated with it is very much dependent on the process and the time frame that we have to deal with it. So the change in process that's been recommended by staff goes to the ability for us to implement the budget that you're now approving. So I do think the two issues are connected. The process speaks to the resources, speaks to the budget component. So I would actually suggest that perhaps we could definitely come back to council with a little bit more detail on the program itself, but I'd be concerned of you separating the process requirements from the budget because they are connected with each other.
Thank you very much. I'm satisfied with the recommendation that the mayor is putting forward. Councillor, how's that feel?
Thank you, Commissioner Closey. I don't disagree, and as I said, I don't want to kick this down the road, but I do think, given the importance of it, I would like to have a more fulsome presentation at the December 21st presentation of the budget, which I think is quite reasonable.
I think our staff have that. Okay, any opposed to the recommendation being put forward by Mayor Burton? I see none, then item number 7 is carried as it's written in the agenda. Item number 8 is the bulk loose leaf collection service expansion options, recommendation being to receive the report. We did ask for additional information under part 2, or item 2 today. Could I have a motion to receive this report? Councillor Grant, thank you very much. Any opposed? I see none, and that's carried. So members of the committee, thank you very much for all the detailed questions, your feedback, and the process we've worked our way through. There's no confidential discussion items, so we are going to adjourn. We will be coming back formally December 1st and 3rd to hear from members of the public in our normal public delegation process. I do have a virtual meeting on the 25th as an open house this year. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how that works in terms of people logging in and providing comment. If in the meantime there's any other information that you want to get, please let us know so that we can make sure our staff can start working on it. Councillor Grant, I see you waving your hand.
Sorry, I was just hoping you could provide us, even through email, with ways to connect with you during that virtual meeting. I know that you're dealing with a lot of groups in the area, but there are some small communities through Facebook the number of us deal with, and it'd be nice to share that information.
Thank you very much for that. We are working on the communication strategy to get the information out there. Staff have already started to put some of that information out, and I'm wondering if one of our staff members in the room there can comment on the virtual open house process and the communication for that. I think Catherine's coming forward for that.
Hello, through you, Mr. Chair. So we have posted how you can participate in that virtual open house online, as well as through social media. The process will be you can use our budget at oakville.ca email as of today and start feeding your questions in, which we will then read aloud at the virtual open house for Tom Adams to answer. And then during that meeting itself, you can call in, and at that time, you'd be connected right through to the Zoom meeting itself and ask your question live.
Is that satisfactory in terms of the communication of the material? In terms of
pointing people? I can find and pass that on to the Facebook user groups that I know of. Thank you.
Okay, so if you're having trouble finding good content to be able to share, let us know and we'll make sure that Corp Communications gets something to you. Okay? Okay, so that's everything, everyone. Thank you very much. We're adjourned. Looking forward to seeing you again at the next date. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.